The chapter of the Holocaust in Hungary is very significant for understanding the final solution, especially because the heart of it occurs in 1944, and in the last year of the war, we can say. So before 1944, the Hungarians had engaged in persecution of the Jews of Hungary, and that also included deportation of about 18,000 Jews to a place called Kamenets-Podolsk in the late summer of 1941, in which most of them were murdered then by the Einsatzgruppen. They also had set up forced labor units, and many men were sent to the Eastern Front, Jewish men as forced laborers, some 45,000, and about 80% of them never came home. Most of this before what happens in 1944. So what happens in 1944? On March 19th, 1944, the Germans invaded their ally, Hungary, because Hungary was trying to get out of the war. And so they come in, and they didn't come into Hungary because they wanted to continue with the final solution, but to keep Hungary in the war on their side. But in coming into Hungary, they already brought with them all of the implementation of the final solution. So one of the things we can talk about in Hungary, and we have to look at the framework a little bit here. They come in on March 19th. By the middle of April, they begin setting up ghettos in the provinces, and have put in all of the anti-Jewish laws they've done everywhere else in a much shorter time. Here it's very intense. They send out 2 deportations at the end of April, but by May 15th, organized systematic deportations from Hungary are beginning, and almost all the Jews of Hungary that are being deported, some 437,000 of them out of about 800,000 in all of Hungary's territories, are deported, and most of them to Auschwitz. And in Auschwitz, between 80 and 85% of the Jews who arrived from Hungary in Auschwitz are murdered upon arrival. So this is all happening very intensely. The deportations will end in this first big wave in the beginning of the second week of July 1944. They'll be quiet in the summer. Hungary will try to get out of its alliance again. The Germans will impose a brand new government. Then there will be deportations again in the autumn. And in November, deportations begin, but this time not to be murdered. Jews are being sent to the Austrian border to work in forced labor and into German camps to work. Many will die because of the conditions, but they're no longer being sent to be murdered in Auschwitz at this point. Hungary itself will be, the Soviet troops will enter Hungary already by autumn of 1944. By the 26th of December 1944, they've encircled Budapest, and Budapest will fall in two pieces. Pest on January 17th, 1945, and Buda on February 12th, 1945. So that's our framework. We have to understand it. So what's going on in 1944? Well, in 1944, there's a lot of things we have to consider. One is the way the war is progressing, because while the deportations of Hungary at their height, in May and June of 1944 and into early July, we have 2 important things. We have the D-Day invasion on June 6th of 1944, and then we have Operation Bagration, which is the Soviet invasion from the West, which will have over 2 million soldiers moving westward. That starts on June 22nd, 1944. So the course of the war is important. And it probably has a lot to do with why the Hungarians declare an end to that first wave of deportations. That, along with a fear that the Americans and British are bombing Hungary in retribution for deporting Jews, which isn't true, but that's what they fear. And the other thing perhaps is because the world has spoken against the deportation. And that brings us to the issue of information. By 1944, a lot is known about what the Nazis have been doing to the Jews. And certainly we had the big declaration of September 17th, 1942. But then we go on and more information is accumulating all the time. And by 1944, quite a bit is known. And especially by late spring 1944, we will have the Auschwitz protocols that will come out to the West, which is giving very detailed information. We know not so exact, but still quite detailed at the time about what was happening in Auschwitz. So information is very important here. And information is one of the things that will bring some of the countries, the Americans and the British, and then later on the Swedes and the Vatican, to protest what the Hungarians are doing to the Jews. Also by 1944, the Americans have set up the War Refugee Board. And so when Hungary's invaded, this puts this new body to the test of how it's going to work to help Jews. And they will work on this, trying to get neutral diplomats to intercede on behalf of Hungarian Jews, but that won't really go into gear until the end of the first phase of deportations. It will be very important in the second phase. So information's here, very important here as well, the course of the war and determining what happens. Another thing, Hungary's trying to get out of the war. That's why they were occupied. But when the Germans will enter with a very small amount of men who are supposed to be putting together the deportation under Adolf Eichmann, maybe 150, 200 men, the deportations are carried out by the Hungarians, by the Gendarmerie, under the Interior Ministry, by the local prefects and the local mayors. These are all the people involved in concentrating the Jews and then deporting them to Auschwitz. So we have to ask questions about collaboration. What's going on here? The Hungarians want to get out of the war, but then suddenly the Hungarians are very involved in the deportation of the Jews. So you can say that getting out of the war has nothing to do with the Jews. That's not the issue. They want to get out of the war. They want to get out of the war for other reasons. But once the Germans are sitting there, there's what we could call, there's certainly enough people involved in Hungary, even if it's not the whole majority, that are interested in then collaborating and taking part in the deportations. So the deportations in Hungary are carried out under German auspices, but by the Hungarians. And that's a very important part to understand. The last thing, again, that I think we need to talk about is, what did the Jews of Hungary know? It's already 1944, and there's a lot of information in the world. There's a lot of discussion in Hungary about what's happening to the Jews. It's in the Jewish press, for example, before the occupation. So in a way, Hungarian Jews know a lot about what's happening, but they don't know the specifics. So Hungarian Jews that survived Auschwitz often say in their testimonies, we arrived in Auschwitz, we had no idea where we were. So there's this complexity about what could be known, what is known, what people understand, what they don't understand, that comes up so strongly when we talk about the final solutions implementation, again, in this first wave of deportations in Hungary. When the deportations will begin again, this will already be after Auschwitz is being stopped as a center for murdering Jews. Now the gas chambers and crematoria have been closed down by this point. And so we have a different kind of deportation in the second part of 1944 when that's going on. So again, Hungary is a complex story about 1944. And again, it raises many questions we want to ask ourselves about the world's response, about how Jews understood things, about why local people will become so involved in the deportations even this late into the war. And then lastly, why are the Nazi Germans pushing this so hard so late into the war? And I think it tells us a lot about their priorities in terms of carrying out the final solution, even as the war is certainly very much not in their favor at this point.